Oleg had become a tired man. There might have been a course of events where he had followed his captain out of the labyrinth. Perhaps then he had not become a tired man. Indeed, he knew well that the tomb of the gods was to blame for his weariness. When Ludwig had insisted he should leave the labyrinth with him, he had been stricken by the alien feeling the statement brought. That a world above the labyrinth felt more strange than the world he knew below. He ended up declining, telling Ludwig that his reason for staying was the same as Ludwig's for leaving. An impalpable reason that had little sense to it. He knew why his friend and companion wanted to escape, to change his fate. But he also knew clearly that he could not do so himself. Perhaps it was just how he was, that his fate lay still within the labyrinth. Perhaps he would never be able to walk the surface again, knowing that he had not seen the depths below him. Foolish, he was well aware, but he all the same felt justified.
Here.
Gremia's voice called from the adjacent chamber. He abandoned peering into the darkened chamber and walked over towards the voice. Gremia stood by a closed door and listened for noises from beyond.
Let's see then.
He bowed down and grabbed the lower edge of the square door. He lifted it up and grabbed his lantern to look inside.
It's good.
Oleg felt sympathy for Gremia. He suspected he did not understand this mania of his, but rather could not bring himself to leave him. Although there never seemed to be much promise in joining the church hunters either, so who's to say? They might be more similar in thought than Oleg would believe. They walked down a menacing stairway that took them into a treasury. Many antique items lay around the floor and were placed upon the stone tables. Having seen so many of them, the shining gold and silver ornate craftsmanship did no longer illuminate the excitement as it once did. Upon entry, guardians awakened from beneath the piles of treasure. Much like the dulled impression of the treasure before them, so had the surprise of old decrepit guardians arising from the shadowed corners. Rather, it sparked a subtle excitement, as they both had grown attached to the wielding of the new standard armament provided by the church. Gladly they had received them, as it reminded them of their former companion and his obstinate use of his silver sword. Strapped to his back, Oleg plunged his blade into a large metal hammerhead that he swung over his head straight down at the enemy, crushing both it and treasures. Gremia leapt further into the room, swinging the sword. As his foe were staggered by the quick blows, he too sheathed his blade into the holster on his back, which was a larger blade. He swung the transformed greatsword sidewise, cleaving the thin body in two. They made a terrible ruckus in swinging their gargantuan weapons around, but they certainly excelled in their work, mashing and cleaving the feeble tomb denizens. When they were done, both were breathing heavily from not yet accumulating enough familiarity to their sizable arms. They observed the room as the treasuries often held the things valued by the church. If there was one thing to be said about Thumerian architecture, one would say they were very practical. They did not build especially innovative, as many chambers were of the same layout. Treasuries too applied to this fact. Oleg had been in plenty, and everyone looked the same, save for varying contents. Due to this, he quickly remarked that along the wall, where usually alcoves in the wall where stone altars commonly stood, one spot conspicuously lacked one.
This is new.
Gremia remarked absently, having noticed the same thing. Oleg examined the surroundings of the missing table. There was nothing. Nothing that would be worth deviating from the usual, and it was puzzling to him. He stared at the wall in front of him. It looked like any wall. He noticed, however, that it lacked the typical lining. He reached out a hand to touch the wall, but as soon as he thought his fingers would touch hard stone, the wall was gone. They now stared into a dark hallway.
Well,
Gremia started, but seemed to think of nothing clever to mark the occasion. Oleg fastened his hammerhead on his back and separated the sword. He took a few careful steps down, with only the lantern light from his belt as a meager guide. The light illuminated only featureless stone. Gremia followed closely. They quickly encountered a double square door as it emerged from the darkness.
strange.
Gremia mused. It indeed was strange, in a way. To have hid away a whole section like this, with strange illusions, made one think what else had been overlooked during their years in the labyrinth. Oleg pushed it open, and it gave away a loud creak that was more fitting for larger hinges. The hall was incredibly and surprisingly large, with trampled dirt floor and ill-kept stone walls. Most notable in the round space was a smouldering mound. It resembled the heap that would remain after a giant pyre. No flames remaining, but only the calmly pulsing glow of the embers. Once it moved, the glow flared up and flames sparked from it. A freakish, stony-skinned body started to burn in bright orange flames. It arose onto 4 legs, reaching a good 20 feet in length. Instead of a faded pyre, now stood before them what reminded of a canine creature. The body was very similar, but the head was disproportionately large. It also lacked any fur and a semblance of skin, yet the occasional tufts of foul strands of hair persisted through the flames. The head looked to be like a skull. No ears or muscle. Several sinisterly narrow holes replaced eyes, flaring with a fire from within. It snarled at them, not unlike the behavior of a dog, albeit this monstrosity appeared more as an ungodly construct made for the sole purpose of crushing down anything within its gargantuan jaw. The flame grew into an inferno as it roared and rushed towards them with frightening speed. They threw themselves out of its assault, and Oleg transformed his weapon. It was indeed ferocious, but seemed sluggish. It turned to him without any violent or hungry intentions. It opened its jaw and plunged its whole head down, attempting to engulf him wholly. He jumped aside and smashed down at its paw with metallic hammerhead. The weight of the hammer immediately had its desired effect, and the leg crumpled by the blow. Orange glowing liquid, presumably its blood, sprayed from the wound. Gremia ran around and stood by its head, where he swung his sword down at the neck. It was immensely thick, and he would have to hack away several times before the beast would be noticeably bothered. It rose up from the attack and turned its freakish head to Gremia. Like in mad speech, it started opening and shutting its mouth, creating small fiery explosions that threatened to devour Gremia, who was forced to retreat the blaze. Oleg tore the blade from the hammerhead and started to swipe at the hind legs. The beast stopped, and its body started to hulk and heave. In a powerful roar, a blast violently erupted from its body that sent Oleg flying. The impact with the ground had his breath escape him. Had it not been for his accompanying prospector, the ghoulish hound had likely been upon him. He struggled on the ground to regain his breath and footing. He turned onto his arms and legs and looked up to see how the hound stood still and were in the process of spewing a sluggish, smouldering mass that spread over the floor. Gremia was no fool, however, and was running around the beast and under its swollen belly. There he fell on his knees, sword held upright, and pushed with his legs, plunging the greatsword deep into the monstrosity. It threw its head back in an infernal roar and started to jump around like an aggravated bull. It kicked with its legs, and Gremia just managed to escape unscathed, save for singed spots on his attire. It ran around the room, leaving a glowing, splattered trail from its bright life essence. Oleg had composed himself and was adamant in utilizing the moment of weakness on the beast's part. It had stopped and loomed still as they both ran closer. It brandished large, skeletal and stony fangs at them, and the entirety of the maw lurched forward to snap at them. They both leapt aside, swinging for its paws. It leapt backwards, avoiding their blows, and clumsily threw its body back towards them. Gremia was the unfortunate one that was mainly targeted by the fiend, and the motion of the upper jaw violently impacted with him. Oleg was now presented with a perfectly exposed neck, and he started to hammer down at it. It shook its head, likely still holding on to poor Gremia. Despite the thought of his companion, he brought it down again. The beast cowered back, and the still body he had shaken was tossed aside. With embered eyes, the beast furiously retaliated and opened the jaw to bite at him. Gambling everything on one single blow, Oleg raised the hammer and swung it over his head towards the impending beast and hit the exposed lower jaws inside. The whole beastly body was thrown to the ground and teeth plunged down at him, burrowing into his left shoulder by the weight of the upper jaw. With his left arm still within the beast's partially closed mouth, he mustered his last strength, separated the sword, leaving the hammer still inside. He tore out his arms from the jaw, and with a skillful exchange of hands, he pierced the sword into the glowing eye of the hound. It made a final growling sigh, and the body became still. Oleg fell backwards with the sword still in the eye socket. He laid there with his arm throbbing and becoming wet with blood. He looked over to his friend who was lying still on the cold floor. The misery of the sight gave him a sort of strength, and he lifted himself up on his legs. He tore off the holy shawl on his back and started to press it down onto the most severe bloody leakage. He fell down beside Gremia, who had his midsection badly damaged.
Damn it, Gremia.
Gremia turned his head to him, gurgled and spat out some blood.
Don't say it. I'm fine with it.
He managed to stammer out before closing his eyes. Oleg sat with him until he stopped breathing. He peered over at the beast. Beyond stood a shrine, like many other rooms of its kind. He knew a reward would await, but there was no satisfaction. There had been so many of them, and along the way they had surely become pointless. But it was only now that he thought of it. He thought of the first day in the labyrinth. It had been him, Gremia, and Ludwig. They met for the first time then, and had never dwelt separately. Perhaps it was supposed to end this way, all along. He stood. The pain started only now to make itself known. He begrudgingly walked over to see the poor compensation for his long endeavors. His final prize. It was a chalice. Not an uncommon thing to find, but this one he had never seen before. It looked almost organic. A light green orb, almost in the shape of an apple, with a hole made for the liquids. He held it. With his good hand he managed to pry open the dead hound's jaw to retrieve the hammerhead. He took out the sword and left the chamber, trekking back all the way to where they had started. When he neared the entry chamber, he could hear voices. Prospectors. He knew not wholly why, but his first instinct was fear. He did not want to see them, talk with them. The thought of leaving and entering into another world, after everything, was haunting. He placed the little chalice right onto the labyrinth floor. Then he turned around and ran away, never intending to return. The experience of ethereal travel in itself was difficult to comprehend after the fact, but emerging into such a surreal place would make any mind doubt what reality truly was defined as. When the suppressive white fog released Oscar and settled on the floor, he saw a chamber completely covered in blue shades, like he was looking at a painting. Beyond the arching doorway seemed to lay an abyss of a mystic blue, night fallen in terror. He rocked up to the door and stood on its threshold. Eduarda, in a similar fashion, then appeared behind him, giving him insight as to what his own expression looked like. How strange. Is it not? He expressed his amazement as well as he could to Eduarda. Admiring the view herself, her response was delayed.
The stone?
Yes. And these clouds. I can't describe it.
Oh, I know. It's pretty.
The room before them was grand and filled with prospectors and scholars alike, wandering around in amazement while, to the best of their abilities, trying to conduct their work properly in such a queer environment. Having never before been into the labyrinth and interacting with the grand orb chalice, the view made a dream seem more like the reality. That he had simply fallen asleep and awakened to something that was not of the waking world. Excuse me. A prospector politely shoved his way past into the room, followed by Mayhew, who looked much more shaken, sickly so. He squeezed his way past and aimlessly wandered into the room.
Mayhew? Everything in order?
Eduarda asked caringly. He turned and appeared as if the vomit was halfway up his throat. First he shook his head, but then transitioned into a precarious nod.
I just need to sit down. It must have been from there. You know.
He gestured limply with one arm towards the entry chamber.
I'll just sit down for a spell.
He stumbled over to a corner next to a table where two women stood, examining the blue mush scraped from the walls. Eduarda and Oscar stepped further into the large chamber, a chamber that seemed to be the castle of the stars. Stonework was distinctly the foundational construction of the space, but it was covered with a blue hue that seemed naturally caused. Roots of a similar color crept over the walls. Then there were the hazy, fog-like clusters that most aptly was described as having been gathered up straight from the night sky itself. On the nights where the deep green and blue colors revealed themselves among the stars. he noted that the prospector seemed rather astonished, much like himself. He awkwardly approached one of them, wanting a conversation to ensue naturally. I have never seen such sights, Oscar said out loud, and not aimed at anyone in particular. The prospector continued to look up into the drifting cosmic cloud. Such a sight was indeed surreal, and made one believe one could reach through it like a heavenly window. He waited for the man to give him a response.
Yeah, indeed,
he finally said. Oscar nodded to himself and looked up into the same direction as the man. I don't recall any mentions of this phenomena in the documentations. Is this a natural occurrence here? The prospector turned to him, looking as if he had just noticed him and was now trying to remember who he was. What? You know, that thing. What is it?
not a clue, mate.
No? How so?
What? Floating parts of the sky is normal in the upper church?
No. But are they not down here? The man scoffed, and Oscar only now thought that it indeed was rather strange, even for the fabled tomb of the gods.
No, Sir Vicar. In all my days, never have I seen something like this.
Oh, pardon me. It is my first expedition to this magical place.
You don't say.
Oscar walked over to Weldmere, who, along with other clerics, were in the process of establishing a field station of research. All in order? His friend looked back at him in discreet surprise. Indeed. Sure you can spare the time? We would manage without you if it proves too cumbersome. Do not speak of it. He pulled at his shoulder to have him fully face him. He expressed himself with a low voice. I tell you, as vicar, this is one of the few distractions. Doing something away from the world, you know? Weldmere leaned back and nodded understandingly. They were a close-knitted orphanage group and would understand each other with fewer words. The lead prospector, Morris, came up with one of his hands cupped, holding something. The whole place is curious indeed. He looked like he had opened a present and was now showing pridefully his gift. In his hand was, pooled together in a strange, translucent sludge, small creatures similar to snails. It is teeming with them, crawling over the walls. Weldmere was at the ready with a glass tray that he held out. Morris was carringly hesitant to hand over his find, but ultimately did so. How in the world did you manage to uncover something like this? I can't say any of my acquaintances ever mentioned this place, Morris asked. It was quite by accident, in fact. I can't seem to recall the original purpose of the investigation, but I do remember it was located very out of place, right under their noses. Morris attentively nodded.
Well, peculiar indeed. Shall we be off then?
I will remain here, Weldmer said, poring over the little snails.
We needn't go far in here for fascinating finds. Will you be coming with us then, Vicar?
Yes, I will personally lead the researches together with Lady Eduarda.
Right. Gather them up and we'll depart.
He turned to the room, clapped his hands and circled with his index finger in the air, which summoned every prospector to his side. Oscar and Eduarda turned as well to the research base. Their own signaling language, however, was superfluous as the team of field researchers had already been beckoned, equipment at ready. The one he only spotted lingering was Mayhew. He sat along the wall, legs crossed, book in lap and head sunken as if asleep.
Mayhew?
Oscar spoke out to him, but he remained with his back turned. He then approached him, for he now believed that he had in fact fallen asleep, however strange it might seem. But upon standing just behind him, Mayhew's head came to life. His body remained still, and he looked around with confusion, glimpsing Oscar over his shoulder.
Oh, Oscar. I must have drifted off.
He removed the dark cowl over his head and scratched the top of the brown hair. He sniggered gently. His expression suggested no memory of the previous nausea.
This place is indeed unique. I had the most compelling experience just now.
You had?
I did. It was incredible, actually.
He clambered to his feet and closed the book.
There is something here, something extraordinary. There are pieces I yet miss. But I was just, reading to get my mind in order as I do. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. Or, no, like I was somewhere else. It is always so hard to put it into words.
I know. It's all right.
Well, it's like I'm more aware here. Imagine always starting a fire. You know the circumstances of its creation and the product of it. But other than that, the most intricate machinations are admittedly obscured. Right?
Oscar nodded. Mayhew reached out towards the root-covered ceiling and waved around fleetingly with his hand. The strange clouds of the cosmic night flowed with and around his hand. He gathered some of it up and concentrated it within his palm, creating a perfect sphere.
By the...
Oscar noticed in his own astonishment that Mayhew was not without his own expression of surprise. although one with more excitement that it had worked.
And suddenly you do understand how fire works, and can conjure it with just your hands.
The sphere of void dissipated into the surroundings, engulfed by reality.
Have you listened? Have you heard anything particular?
Mayhew's apparent sense of wonder was exchanged with a plain uncertainty. He steered his eyes away, down to the floor.
No, or not attentively so. It's unnerving, I must admit. I cannot focus very long, for it conjures painful things in me.
Is it distracting?
No, just uncomfortable.
Do you believe it could be something? Should we perhaps bring more mystics with us? I mean, not to be a bother, but what if it has a source for being so potent? If it is like you say, and something is here and is perhaps even capable of causing such an influence in you, then perhaps we ought to be extra careful. Mayhew gave an understanding and resigned nod, without facing him. His suggestion may have been crude in comparison to the reality his friend knew, judging by his reaction.
You are right. It does not feel wholly malevolent, though.
Just tell me if it becomes too much.
Right. Shall we go?
They turned towards the party, and Oscar waved at Morris, who impatiently was looking their way. The lead prospector's eyes instantly became alert, and he said a few heated words to his peers, and half of the prospectors followed their leader into the next chamber, the remainder waiting for the scholars to head in next. We go in. Keep an eye on each other and the prospectors. This is entirely uncharted territory. Oscar led the 5 scholars as they one by one followed after the prospectors into the narrow doorway. The corridor was short and emerged into a large room with a giant flight of stairs leading further downwards. Several other such stairs could be glimpsed over the edge, running along the wall below the former one.
Wait!
Mayhew called out upon entering the open chamber, immediately interrupting Morris, who stood with one foot down the first set of stairs, torch held out before him, now looking back.
There... Should we not go here first?
He pointed right, where a walkway ran along the wall towards another door. The prospectors looked confused amongst themselves, then at their leader, who looked as confused, but shrugged and snapped out of his stun.
Sure. Everything must be explored, I suppose. But I insist on leading.
With that, he walks over and past the group of scholars as they peeked out from the corridor into the room. Following him was 5 prospectors, who awkwardly attempted to shuffle their way past on the landing they had emerged on, which was not big enough to house their entire party.
Sensed something in that direction?
As Oscar turned to inquire about his causes, he noticed his friend bore a stone-cold expression that seemed on the verge of horror.
Mayhew?
He came to and blinked himself, conscious of the situation.
It was a call. Amidst the despair. It was so powerful it almost took control.
Despair? Explain, please. It sounds severe.
The flanking prospector made his bother known with a prompting grunt. They started to walk, but Oscar did not turn away from Mayhew.
The feeling, the resonance, pure despair. That is what comes to mind. But it receded for a moment, and in that moment, it was all so quick. But I knew.
Knew what?
He shook his head and held up a hand of rejection. He sped up and approached Morris. Oscar followed him.
Stop!
Mayhew once more interrupted the prospector's work. With just their experience in mind, the annoyed glances aimed towards Mayhew were justified. But the tomb explorers held not onto their faces for long. The sound of footsteps could be heard further ahead. Every head precariously shifted their attention towards the end of the corridor. All was still as they awaited something, until a light emerged in the dark from behind the corner. It was a luminescent, lanky figure, terribly long, and wore a white, featureless robe with a hood up. In its two hands it held a staff. With a pleasant glow, it appeared like some form of divine omen, walking serenely towards them. Mayhew laid a hand on Morris' shoulder to stop any probable antagonistic action. His other hand he held up into the air to signal the same message to the others. It came closer and closer. Every prospector tensed up and moved their hands closer to their weapons, but never touched them completely. The figure did indeed share features with the old tomb guardians, specifically the hollow face with the agape mouth. Like it was oblivious to them being there in every sense, it walked agonizingly slowly between them, leaving each dumbfounded individual with the only reasonable option of gently stepping out of its way. It made no sounds as it passed, and turned to walk down the stairs. They watched it turn and descend the second flight with the same uncanny pace. When Mayhew seemed satisfied, he removed his hand from Morris.
Now, continue.
The prospectors looked in awe and disbelief, but shrugged.
Never explored with such a useful mystic,
he commented low enough that it appeared mostly directed to himself.
I don't...
Mayhew paused and searched for the words. Overall, he had appeared more scattered in his mind since first stepping into the new labyrinth. Oscar could only imagine how it felt for such an arcane-tuned mind, and more so, what could be its cause.
I don't believe any mystic has ever felt what I feel here, Mr. Morris.
They all marched forward, now with everyone peering over at Mayhew for a reaction or prompt. Within the corridor, about where the ghostly figure turned the corner, they could distinguish a very low, distant tapping sound. It could only be speculated if it was the cause for Mayhew giving pause yet again, or if by another ethereal source, imperceivable by the common senses. He closed his eyes, brow furrowed, as if attempting to better hear a formless, inaudible voice. For it could no longer be the tapping sound, as it had faded completely. His head turned in different directions.
I can't really feel anymore. It is different here. There are plethora of possibilities, but
He opened his eyes and scanned the room. A square chamber with ornate structures, akin to statuesque pillars, adorned two of the walls, positioned opposite each other. Stone walkways ran perpendicular to the decorations. Mayhew approached the wall and, from one of the roots, gently plucked one of the little snails into his hand.
These show the way. They are your guides as I am. They are in unison with each other.
He held out his hand and showed it to the group. He brought the little creature closer to his face. He looked knowingly at the thing before shutting his hand over it and raising it up above his head. A visible resonance flowed out around his lofty hand, emitting a low reverberation that filled the halls with an omnipresent sound that was more so felt than heard. To everyone's astonishment, another similar sound made everyone turn their heads around the room, as this responding sound seemed to have a source located somewhere far away.
They are vessels, I believe.
My Mayhew! This is an incredible find. Is this the very will of the gods? In the palm of your hand?
Oscar could not help his mind rushing to conclusions. The thrill was overwhelming.
Perhaps this is their domain. Could it be they are very near? More so in other parts. What else could be the cause for all these wonders?
You think we could be upon one of them?
I would say it is very possible. The uncanny senses here differs largely from anything I ever experienced. I had pictured a more concrete will, but who am I to predict the machinations of, well, God?
Mayhew tilted his head down to peer at his own hands, as he opened them where the little crawling creature writhed.
The sound,
a prospector commented, looking towards the general direction of its source.
it is still going. That would be our direction, I wager.
Morris declared, and turned to Mayhew for a possible confirmation.
I would agree. To me, it most certainly appears as a means of communication.
From the snails?
No, I don't believe it is them. They seem not to possess any sentience. They just are. An empty thing.
Could it be a trap? If the gods wanted us harm, they could surely accomplish such without trickery. Oscar stoically foiled Morris' theory, feeling a foreign sense of accomplishment and dedication having washed over him. It was a very sobering experience, as if he had truly found faith by himself.
But what if it's not the gods? The labyrinth has always been hostile. I mean, the Thumerians.
Edwarda consulted Mayhew. He thought for a moment. The impressions he experienced were clearly of great difficulty to relay in just words.
It does feel familiar in a sense. There is nothing of ill intent of my knowing. Only this deep sorrow, or perhaps guilt?
What does that mean? Sounds rather sinister, a prospector said, which was followed by Morris slapping over the back of the prospector's head. What's with you? They have always been the tomb of the gods, and now that we are upon them, you start to doubt their existence? The prospector did not speak up further and sank in his place, sheepishly rubbing the point of impact. If there is a presence of despair here, I for one know exactly what Master Ludwig would have done. He would have raised his sword like so. Morris held his sword aloft towards one of the doorways in a somewhat sarcastic manner. Then he would selflessly plunge into the depth, after whatever source of sorrow that dwells in this place, and dispel it with pure chivalrous fashion. Oscar looked upon the performance and sneered in secret, though it seemed to fully rile the prospectors, who all expressed their invigorated spirit with a rallying murmur. Indeed, having heard of and met the man on a few occasions, the mimicry was rather accurate. Shall we continue then? Oscar said. Morris lowered his blade and turned back to Mayhew. Seems like you'll be leading the way. Does the sound tell you anything?
No, nothing. It seems to only be a sound.
Righty then. Let's see what's causing it. Morris took a torch from a nearby hand and started advancing further into the deep blue depths, through the door that he had playfully gestured towards. Upon entry into a larger, long hall, the sound became more distinct and bore a very familiar quality. In a low hum, a small, ringing bell was heard. Just a low clang, with seconds of intervals between another lonesome clang. They all turned their heads around the empty space. There was another exit by the far end. It would appear the little bell came from there. The large group trotted over the stone floor. There were only the sounds of their echoing footsteps and the flickering of their torches to fill the vacant space. They entered into another large open room that immediately presented them with a staircase descending further in. Morris suddenly held up his arm to force a halt. Only he and another prospector had entered into the chamber fully and was both staring down the steps.
There's something here,
he whispered over his shoulder.
You said something?
No, what is it?
Mayhew hissed back.
I think it knows we are here.
Morris turned back into the room, then slowly took the first steps down, waving with his torch as if giving a warning signal. Oscar shoved gently between the two men still remaining in the door to peek down into the entirety of the chamber. It was a cubic room with the steps leading down to the center of the room. By the landing of the stair, he saw a blue figure. It stood on tall legs, towering a good 10 feet. Arms were equally long as the legs, but it was the head that was the captivating feature. Like it had been blown up like a balloon, bobbing where it sat atop the slender shoulders. From the distance, he could make out small glowing dots covering the bulbous head. He could not make out a face or any such features. It stood turned towards them, and behind it was a lever. A lever which he knew opened a sealed door in the labyrinth. Morris continued descending the stair, with sword in one hand and torch in the other. He was used to the strangeness and was likely prepared for combat. But as he got closer, the humanoid was never provoked or reacted to him being there. The sound seemed to be coming from that very being. Could that thing have been their unorthodox guide? Morris got within inches of the creature. When he did, the prospectors behind Oscar moved out. So did he. They now stood atop the stair with a clear view of the occurrence. The blue thing stood just before the lever contraption, blocking proper use of it. Morris waved with his torch. Nothing. The nerves of the onlooking prospectors grew uneasy, as shown in their twitching and low mutterings. Had it been them, they would likely just kill it where it stood. But Oscar knew Morris had taken to his old master Ludwig particularly much. With the broad side of his sword, he nudged the creature. It followed in his motion, and with tapping, stumbling feet on lanky legs, moved out of his way. Boldly, he took hold of the lever, having sheathed his sword, and turned it over. The lantern, held by the statue, turned from a waning purple into a vibrant blue. Then he walked back up the stairs, casting only a glance back at the peaceable keeper. Over the course of 5 days, the church dedicated much resources and time to the new strange labyrinth. Oscar could only imagine their current operation to only match the scale of the first inquiry into the labyrinth, conducted in a time before his own. He had enthusiastically left much of the church businesses to other cleric members, who had meekly argued against the vicar so vehemently pursuing labyrinth businesses. But he had insisted, rendering them begrudgingly silent. Perhaps he indeed was a fool like they thought, but he did not feel like one. Would a fool fear the old blood and search for a proper path to God, like he did now? More mystics had come to support Mayhew per their own interest and sheer necessity. Eduarda was also accompanied by a grander group of interpreters, and had as early as in the second section sleuthed out the name Is, thus officially finding the proper name to the new labyrinth. Oscar mainly remained at the research stations, working on the many finds brought from all over the explored parts. They had discovered that the roots littering the labyrinth walls was from a tree unknown to them, a foreign species. They had no reference or knowledge of any other specimen. The slugs were an enigma. They had no apparent life cycle or mating behavior. When examined in their natural environment, they simply crawled about or just lay still. They never reacted to their presence, and on their research table, the behavior did not change. Dissection showed only that they contained a sort of sludge, a bright and clear fluid with no indication of organs. Their biology more resembled plants than any living fauna. But a height of interest were the blue beings that had been encountered regularly during their progress. Amusingly, they shared the sentiment that they were something of a native people in Is, but had unsuccessfully been able to properly communicate with them, outside of any guiding sounds that took them deeper into the labyrinth. Oscar was engaged in researching parallels the labyrinth slugs possessed with any other snail-like fauna when he was interrupted by Morris. It was not with words, however, but by rushing in and keeling over, hands on his knees and breathing heavily, starved for air. He composed himself as much as he could, and as quickly as he could.
Vicar, you should come. Mayhew has requested your presence. Both of you.
He glanced over at Weldmere.
Indeed? What is the nature of his request? Well, they have found something. You simply must see it for yourself. And you might want to hurry. The specimen in question is a living one.
The two of them relinquished their work and followed after Morris, and due to the volume he had announced their find with, several other researchers were compelled to follow as well. They traveled the halls after Morris, who did not see it proper to provide more details. Nor did it seem equally proper to ask, since he had clearly stated that only sight would be adequate. They arrived, having toured grand and high hallways, to a large door.
In here. But tread lightly. We don't know if it will be spooked.
Through the door lay around the chamber with a beam of light, be it cast from a natural or otherwise light source, was undetermined, entering through the center point of the dome's ceiling. It was entirely covered with the slithering roots, to the degree the stone was utterly obscured, even on most of the walls. In the middle, below the light, was a group of them gathered around a large object that shifted in place. A black mass with luminescent flora at its top. The spitting image of a dung heap with sprouting flowers atop its mound. But it was in fact no such thing, as seen supporting the mound were tiny black arachnid legs that occasionally stepped in place. Out its back emerged sprouting growths resembling tails, each with a glowing tip and of varying length. The white-garbed clerics, alongside the green and grey prospectors, stood around the animate mound, like it was a newly acquired puppy dog that was being fawned over. When Oscar joined them, he became aware, and felt less inclined towards their exaltation, of an uncomfortable amount of ice upon the mound, placed randomly over it and barely visible. It also became apparent that it was rather similar to a gargantuan caterpillar, albeit particularly bloated. He walked around in awe and came upon a stony lump that out of all features struck him as most likely to be the head. It too had several eyes in it. An oval with a sharp downturned bottom, where a round black maw with spiky teeth lined its edge. Every eye on its entire body moved frantically around in their sockets, completely out of pace with one another, while the mannerism of the thing suggested it to be rather pacified.
Quite the discovery, is it not?
Eduarda commented gleefully, as Oscar had walked a full circle around the creature and nodded, captivated by the dualism of the creature. With such apparent morbid features, he kept regarding the entirety of the form of the largest caterpillar he had ever seen as somewhat adorable.
Yes, very much so. Have you, conducted tests? What do you know of it?
She shrugged.
We haven't dared. With its size, it might turn hostile.
What is its behavior?
It has just been this. Granted, we have not observed it for long.
It was said that no greater discovery had been found since the days of Bergenworth. Nichols, however, did not dare to go as far. The Is caterpillar was indeed marvelous, but to elevate it over the blood itself made his mouth sneer with doubt each time the conversations would so insolently be gripped by the excitement. Yet it was ever only a sneer, and not a comment, for he certainly shared in the feeling of its greatness. A feeling he likely shared by those old scholars of Bergenworth that found a holy medium deep within the tomb. The round chamber of the caterpillar, or whatever it was, saw extensive activity from clerics, researchers and church guards. Additionally, it was no longer as vacant, but several tables and carts with supplies had been moved inside. Once it was echoing, with only the tapping of the creature's spindly legs producing any sound. Now, voices bounced against the walls like the bustling grand hall of the cathedral during communion. And with the same reverence as the masses, they avoided close proximity to the creature as if it were a shrine. Indeed, all the activity may be a dramatical compensation for simply partaking of the discovery. Not this many people were needed to monitor its behavior. Only mystics like himself were frequently and precariously interacting with it. Mostly by touch, while scholars gawked from behind, taking their notes. Would they dare to gingerly pluck one of its flowers? But how would it react? Indeed, the discovery was so grand that none dared tamper with it, for a fear of discovering a horrible and hostile nature all too common in the tomb of the gods. Personally, Nichols considered the bloated body and the freakish stony head with shifting eyes an adorable visage for reasons he was unable to explain. Thus far, it felt like a simple animal, and he would always approach it with the kind aura one tries to manifest when happening upon a charming little squirrel in the forest, not wanting to frighten it. And he felt something of reciprocation from the caterpillar, since it insisted on remaining in place, despite the annoying humans who had abruptly stumbled into its chamber. Perhaps it did not realize they were there. Like many times prior, Nichols donned his gloves, armed himself with his notebook and a tuning fork, and approached the creature. Like always, he cautiously stepped up to it, slowing down the closer he came. Even though the face was turned away, even its body was covered in little black dots. Eyes that undoubtedly watched him. Even if they were not, he wanted to make sure it did not resist his approach, which it never did. Up close, he laid his hand towards its body so the palm touched the glowing white flowers. They did not immediately resemble any known flora. They appeared almost like weeds, cow parsley, or some other common flower found in the fields. He fancied that the creature could feel through them, so he always wanted the initial touch to come through them. Then he gently patted the grey skin in between the black glossy dots. He smiled secretively. Like he would, he ultimately placed the palm against it, making sure to find a spot where he would not cover any of the dots, as he imagined he himself would certainly not want anything poking into his eyes, despite their location. The only thing he had so far gleaned while he stood there listening was as if the space beyond his palm was much bigger and allowed more sound than what was physically there, but was currently void. He opened his eyes and meandered towards the head. He liked to meditate looking into its aimless eyes. He sat himself down on the stone of Is, covered with blue growths, like sitting upon an ocean, or perhaps more fittingly, being submerged within it, in light of the drifting patches of the deep night sky. He tuned out all the voices from the scholars, staring at the eyes that never found rest. He focused on one, and when everything seemed quiet, he raised the tuning fork and struck it. Incredibly, ecstatically, something happened. One eye, the one he had been focused on for the first time ever, became still and slowly turned his way. It locked with his gaze and his jaw dropped, letting out an awestruck gasp. For the first time, he heard something. He fumbled after his notebook, anticipating the conceptualization of a rune, but when he did not immediately find it, simply by reaching with his hand, he gave up the effort. The sounds, growing louder and louder, were too captivating, too alluring. From the grand space within the caterpillar they grew, while more of the eyes locked onto him. He felt blessed, and all the voices coalesced as they grew, finally telling him that he indeed was just that. Having heard a sound reminiscent of a very distant thunder, and felt the faintest of trembles in the floor, the session had given pause, as its attendants and spokesman looked amongst themselves in anticipation. When no further sound accompanied the former, they all silently agreed that the most proper thing to do was to continue the presentation. Having mostly forgotten about the sound, they were again interrupted, this time by the door swinging open violently.
Oscar? Master Oscar? Oh, come quick! It's hatching!
One of the chief researchers came rushing into the lesser room, where Oscar sat crossed-armed, alongside others of his close associates.
What is?
He dryly asked.
The thing, the Is caterpillar, it came through, from the labyrinth. The chamber is destroyed. You must all come this instant.
Everyone stood hesitantly and mumbling words of awe and astonishment.
By the gods! Call upon the church god!
The distressed woman bit her lip and more calmly addressed the order.
I believe there is no need, but it is imperative you come and see. I can't explain it.
Without further delay, the room was quickly vacated and they rushed after the stupefied woman, who led them down the stairs to the ground floor of the west wing and further down into the basement research halls. On their way, They crossed paths with several disheveled people, some covered in dust, with the occasional dot of red beneath it all, coughing as they were supported by another person, endeavoring to get them to safety. Ultimately, they came upon a blockade of debris, fallen rocks and crumbled church architecture, where staunch church guards had managed to remove enough of the heavy stones for a crawling space. Presently a man was crawling out, sniveling with distress and bleeding profusely from his forehead. Oscar went up to him as he was helped to his feet.
By the gods, are you well? What happened?
He looked to have trouble focusing. He blinked his eyes as he tried to focus on him.
Vicar, Nichols, it just appeared and... What? Is Nichols still inside?
The man nodded.
He came with it. Then it's... I must be dreaming.
He sank once more to the floor. As he was helped up and away, Oscar unflinchingly went over to peer into the little crawl space. It was not entirely dark, but natural light seemed to lay beyond the stones. As he moved to crawl inside, people behind protested, but he ignored them. He had to twist awkwardly in order to get through and around the edges, but it was manageable. He emerged into a grand space that could not have been there before. It resembled a natural cave, but grander than any chamber he could conceive. Both stalagmites and stalactites covered the walls, but it could not wholly be natural, since broken pillars and remnants of architecture could be seen around them. Architecture he could not readily account for. Additionally, there seemed to be the contours of figures embedded in the stone, visages of despair, although he was unsure, since his eyes were captivated by the centerpiece. Under the ray of natural light, finding its way in through the cave ceiling, sat a white, towering shape of complex form. From a distance, the first impression was that of a flower with intricate petals with several holes in them. More of his entourage emerged from the crevice after him, but never managed to call out to him, for they were silenced by the sight, just like he was. It appeared as if the space had always been there, only now being exposed by a violent ruination of the built structure. Then he noticed the figure of a huddled up man before the white shape. The notion made Oscar regain the will to advance into the room, yet he was wary of the giant shape that faintly moved in small motions, reminiscent of breaths being taken.
Wait.
He turned to find Morris and a handful of armed prospectors having emerged from the crevice.
Have you seen that thing?
He hissed.
It's the Is caterpillar. So I've heard, and it could mean it's now hostile.
Their grown party continued the advance with the prospectors in the front. It was difficult to define what exactly it was he saw sitting several feet away on the cave floor. A grey, damp body with protrusions from its back. It became apparent that Nichols lay in prostration before the massive body, and coming closer, the thing seemed almost to mimic his gesture, with more of its features becoming distinguished. What was the primary cause for the difficulty in perception was the many tentacles writhing and slithering around its body, emerging from it like arms and moving constantly. Underneath their veil, however, one could see a giant sphere on the ground, attached to a humanoid body, with arms laying outstretched beside the downward-facing head. The legs seemed molded together to form the shape of a snail, still somewhat visible in a kneeling position. On its back were the most concentrated emergence of tentacles, along two massive wings that appeared to be missing the actual webbing and only consisted of tentacles forming the shape. It was then evident why this thing was supposedly the caterpillar of Is. Like a discarded shell laying behind it, the stony head of the caterpillar was seen, as well as the legs. But the body had shrunk, nearly vanished. They all precariously made their way over to Nichols, but when Morris and his peers tried to grab him away from the monstrosity, he spoke.
Oh, yes. The blessed queen. The blessed daughter. Oh, the blessed queen. Ebrietas.
He muttered with his face to the ground. Simultaneously, the two of them, Nichols and the large thing, tilted their heads upward. The giant round mass turned itself up. Like a shell, it opened, revealing tube-like floral growth underneath, covering a red fleshy viscera. Two green dots, like emeralds, sat as eyes on the white tube growths under the opening in the round shell of a head.
Oh, daughter of the cosmos, what say you?
He reached for her. Everyone retreated backwards at the thing moving, frightened by the macabre visage of its face. Even with their weapons brandished, their forms seemed too puny. But Mayhew did not fear. He walked respectfully towards the being, towards his ward Nichols. He had confidence in his steps. The slug creature remained still. The tentacles continuously moved around as if possessing a will of their own.
Come, come all. She wishes to look upon you.
Nichols declared echoingly to them all. Oscar looked at the prospectors. Eduarda moved to follow their friend. Precariously, he did as she did. He heard from behind him that the prospectors started to cautiously step after them. It was difficult to tell what the creature had in mind. The giant head hung above them. The green deep orbs did just seem as some sort of decorative growth, rather than real functioning eyes. What did strike him as eyes was the round, wet growths in the red insides.
Nichols?
Mayhew lay a hand on him, still looking up at the creature. It seemed to look back at him.
What is this?
His voice trembled, and he looked ready to run in fear.
She speaks to us. She is sorry. She knows I will not be the same afterwards. But how else would her greatness ever be fathomed?
What?
You seek the truth. The one truth. Tell her that you do.
The truth, Oscar said, and walked to stand beside Nichols. We seek truth. The truth of the gods. He looked up at the massive entity, at her, still unchanging in demeanor, yet constantly shifting in place. It was Nichols that replied.
The gods. Or only she remains, left behind as her kin, vanished.
While he spoke, there came a low and distant sound of a bell having been chimed, a single tone that accompanied his speech from an unknown source all around him. Where did they go? Her wings began to stretch out. Her head lifted up and her arms reached towards the ceiling. The tentacles all moved in a curve, out from her back and up towards the area where she held her hands. A flash of light exploded, and in its place was a large black hole in the space that stretched out over their heads.
The cosmos.
Stars began to form inside the blackness, and it seemed as a window. Blue and green cloudy shapes took the form of a detailed version of the night sky.
They left for higher planes, above what lies below, ascending and emerging. They are here while they are there. They exist where they please. Yet she remains. Stuck and without the guidance of her kin.
Oscar moved closer, now standing between Ebrietas and Nichols. She turned her head down as he did. The black sky slowly faded. He tried to maintain a brave face in front of the pulsating innards of her face, and the constant wet sound of the little white growths moving about. He had no illusions that his uncomfort surely was known to this great being.
Your kin. They were the great gods of the Thumerians.
Thumeru left with them.
Nichols continued to speak behind him, though his position now gave the impression it was Ebrietas' own malplaced voice he heard.
The greatest of their servants made his people's dream a reality. By departing with them. Oh, but not her. Thumeru was much greater, and had been with them for time immemorial. Thus she knows it to be true, that she is destined to find them.
The cosmos. They vanished into the sky.
They vanished beyond, deep into the depths of things where they now linger. Just above our heads, so very near. The cosmos. Yet how to reach it?
Oscar looked back at his astonished peers. He saw the history as it had been told to him, how scholars once left Bergenworth, faithful and filled with love for the gods. How they had tirelessly prayed and worked with their essence to grow ever near divinity itself. Standing just before what had never been reached before, he did not feel kindred to Lawrence or Harald. Great men who had indeed given him his life and this chance, but were led astray. He imagined this is what it must have been for the first scholars of Bergenworth when they happened upon the eldritch truth. It was them that had taken him here. Wherever that old institution was today, he imagined he owed it all to the knowledge they gathered. He turned back to the daughter of the cosmos.
O Ebrietas, great one of the cosmos. Long have my people searched for the truth and prayed to the gods. Like you, we desire closeness, the ascendancy to the great beyond. Though we are not the Thumerians of old, we share their diligence. Would you be our guide in our search, O Great One? He knelt down before her, like the supreme queen she was.
Nichols was quiet, and she looked upon him, or at least he imagined she did so. A moment of silence passed. It was ended by a deep sigh of relief from Nichols that transitioned into a slight, playful giggle. Ebrietas then lowered her own spherical, malformed head down to the ground, laying it against the stone. She stretched out her arms, and all the tentacles came to rest. It was a glorious experience.
Cosmic Eye Watcher badge. Badge of a member of the choir, elite of the Healing Church. The eye signifies the very cosmos. The choir stumbled upon an epiphany very suddenly and quite by accident. Here we stand, feet planted in the earth, but might the cosmos be very near us, only just above our heads?